The smoke was already pouring from the number 3 engine when Lieutenant Robert Femoyer told his crew to leave him behind. It was November 2nd, 1944. Somewhere over northern Italy, 20,000 feet above the earth, a 23-year-old navigator from Huntington, West Virginia sat slumped against the fuselage wall of a B-17 Flying Fortress, his abdomen torn open by German flak. He had refused morphine. He knew the drug would cloud his mind, and if his mind went dark, every man on that plane died with him. So he held his own wounds together with his hands, pulled out his charts, and guided 9 men home through 140 miles of enemy sky. He never saw them land. This is not a story the military wanted told, because the unit Robert Femoyer flew with officially should never have existed at all. By the autumn of 1944, the Allied air war over Europe had become a mathematics problem written in blood. American commanders at 15th Air Force Headquarters in Bari, Italy, were calculating losses the way accountants calculate quarterly losses, grimly, precisely, and with the understanding that the numbers would only get worse. Strategic bombing missions deep into the Reich were costing crews at rates that defied sustainability. Some bomb groups were losing 30% of their men per month. Fresh replacements arrived from the United States, barely trained, barely prepared, and were fed directly into the machine. But there was a quiet group of men at the edges of this war who moved differently. They flew different routes, kept different records, and answered to a different chain of command. They were the crews of the 15th Strategic Air Force's Special Navigation Training Detachment, a unit assembled in the spring of 1944 under circumstances so unusual that its official paperwork was backdated, reclassified, and in several cases simply never filed. Historians would later spend decades trying to reconstruct even its basic roster. Robert Edwin Femoyer was one of its navigators. He had enlisted in 1942, fresh out of Morgantown, West Virginia, where he had been studying chemical engineering at West Virginia University. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of young man his professors described as possessing an almost unnerving calmness under pressure. The Army Air Forces noticed. After completing navigator training at San Marcos Army Airfield in Texas, Femoyer was flagged. Not for a standard bomb group assignment, but for something else. Something that required navigators who could work under conditions that the training manuals did not cover. What those conditions were would only become clear later. And even then, only partially. The missions flown by Femoyer's detachment were not standard bombing runs. They were precision pathfinder operations, flights designed to locate and mark targets for larger formations following behind. This required navigators of exceptional skill, because Pathfinder aircraft flew ahead of the main force, often without fighter escort, at altitudes and on headings calculated to confuse German radar operators who had, by 1944, become frighteningly good at their work. The Luftwaffe's radar network across Austria, Hungary, and northern Italy could track a formation from the moment it crossed the Adriatic coast. Pathfinder crews knew that the moment they were detected, every anti-aircraft battery in range would be fed their exact position. Femoyer flew his first combat mission in August 1944, then his second, then his ninth. Crews rotated out after 50 missions if they survived. Most didn't make it past 20. By the time November arrived, Femoyer had flown more missions than the official records would ever fully account for, because many of those missions, for reasons that remain partially classified even today, were not logged under his name. On the morning of November 2nd, 1944, his crew was assigned to a mission targeting the Blechhammer oil refineries in what is now southern Poland. Blechhammer was one of the most heavily defended targets in the entire European theater. It supplied synthetic oil to a German war machine that was beginning to starve, and Adolf Hitler had personally ordered its protection at all costs. The flak batteries surrounding the complex numbered in the dozens. Their crews were experienced. Their aim was precise. Every Allied airman who flew to Blechhammer knew the statistics, and the statistics were not encouraging. Femoyer's B-17, flying at approximately 22,000 feet on the bomb run, took its first hit somewhere over the target complex. The shell burst below and to the right of the fuselage, shredding the aluminum skin and sending fragments the size of playing cards through the aircraft's interior. 2 pieces of shrapnel struck Femoyer directly, one in the right side of his back, one tearing through his lower abdomen. The wounds were catastrophic. The other crew members, seeing the blood, immediately reached for the morphine syringes carried in the aircraft's first aid kit. Femoyer stopped them. He could not speak clearly. The pain was beyond description, but he shook his head and pushed the morphine away, because he understood something his crewmates had not yet calculated. The aircraft had been knocked off course by the Flak barrage. The automatic pilot was damaged. The pilot, Second Lieutenant William Hartog, was fighting the controls manually, and they were now somewhere over Austrian territory, surrounded by German fighter stations and anti-aircraft positions, with no navigator conscious enough to tell them where they were going. Except that Femoyer was conscious. Barely, but conscious. He asked to be propped up. He asked for his charts. And then, for the next 2.5 hours, Robert Femoyer navigated that aircraft across 140 miles of enemy-controlled airspace on pure willpower and what can only be described as a refusal to abandon his crew. He called out headings. He calculated wind corrections by hand. He marked their position on the chart with a pencil he could barely grip. When he lost consciousness briefly, he came back. When the pain made his vision white at the edges, he breathed through it and kept working. The crew did not know until later that Femoyer had understood, from the moment he saw his wounds, that he was not going to survive it. This was not pessimism. It was the calm, engineering student assessment of a young man who knew what a shrapnel wound to the lower abdomen meant in 1944 without a surgical team, at altitude, in a damaged aircraft. He was not trying to save himself. He was buying time for 9 other men. Here is the detail that changes the story entirely. When the B-17 finally crossed back over the Adriatic Sea and reached the relative safety of Allied airspace, Femoyer allowed the crew to give him the morphine he had refused for over 2 hours. He was transferred out of the aircraft on a stretcher upon landing at their base near Foggia, Italy. He died of his wounds shortly after. He was 23 years old, but the investigation that followed his death uncovered something that the military had not expected. In reviewing Femoyer's navigation logs recovered from that flight, the charts he had marked with his blood-stained hands, senior navigators of 15th Air Force determined that his course corrections had been not merely adequate, but exceptional, under circumstances that would have defeated a healthy navigator at a chart table on the ground. Femoyer had maintained positional accuracy to within margins that his superiors described, in official documentation, as almost impossible to believe. His final heading correction, made somewhere over the Adriatic with his hands pressed against his own wounds, had directed the aircraft directly onto final approach for the Foggia airfield, as if he had never left his station. Robert Femoyer was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation, signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and dated March 9, 1945, described his actions in the careful, formal language of military commendation. But it could not fully capture what had actually happened in that aircraft. It could not put into words the specific quality of courage required to look at your own mortality clearly, set it aside, and spend the last hours of your life doing mathematics. The unit he served with, the one that officially never existed, the one whose records were reclassified and whose missions were logged under cover designations, was quietly dissolved in early 1945 as the air war entered its final phase. Most of its members returned home to lives they rarely discussed. Some never discussed them at all. The specific nature of the operations they flew, the full scope of what their Pathfinder missions accomplished, remains only partially reconstructed by historians who have spent careers chasing documents through the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. What we know is incomplete. What we can verify is this: a young man from West Virginia, flying a mission that was never supposed to be recorded for a unit that was never supposed to exist, made a choice in the worst possible moment that saved 9 lives at the cost of his own. He did not make that choice in a sudden flash of heroism. He made it methodically, deliberately, over 2.5 hours of sustained agony, because he had been trained to solve problems, and he had not finished solving this one. There is a memorial to Robert Femoyer at West Virginia University, where he never finished his degree. It is modest. Most people who walk past it do not know his name. Some of the most important things that ever happened were done by people history almost forgot to write down.